So this is Judy and Punch. This is the feature debut of Aussie filmmaker Mira Folks, who also wrote the picture, and as the title suggests, is a new, almost revisionist exploration of the classic British Punch and Judy puppet shows. So the basis of those performances, Punch and Judy, not Judy and Punch, or the stories behind them rather, was that the main character, Punch, the basis of those Punch and Judy shows was Punch, with large, vibrant colors and short, claustrophobic stages. Punch and whatever puppet he'd be sharing the stage with that day would engage in close-quarter combat, usually, if not always, something as simple as Punch whacking his female compadre with a bat. You know, like, that's like a classic thing. You remember.
Sounds like the Honeymooners.
But I mean, yeah, it sounds like that. But I mean, you also think it sounds like clowns hitting each other in the face with pie makeups. You know, pie makeups. God, jeez, whipped cream pies. That's what I'm thinking of. But then you also got to think, like, when you think of puppets, you think of puppets like beating down on one another, and that's sort of the foundation here. And like the idea of a man hitting a woman with a bat doesn't sound all that great, but these puppet shows, which have roots dating back to the 17th century, are also deeply rooted to entertainment as we know it today. And it's with that very rich idea, that very rich plantation, that Folks forms the basis of this movie. So obviously the story follows Punch and Judy, played by Damon Harriman and Mia Wasikowska, respectively, who are puppeteers instead of puppets, living in the village of Seaside, which you'll notice very quickly doesn't have any kind of water near it. They run the hottest ticket in town. Yeah, that Seaside thing is ridiculous. It's a great way to introduce the imbeciles of this town. But Judy and Punch run the puppet show, and it's exactly the same kind of barbaric puppet show that I described earlier. So that being said, this show also has something special behind it in Judy. In the early performances and even in her early interactions with people, it's clear that she has this almost magical flexibility to her. Her puppets really flow. One of the first things you see is her make her puppet do a front flip, and it's just like super smooth and super glorious, super lifelike, you know, and already we can tell that without her, the show wouldn't succeed, or at least not have the special quality, and wouldn't succeed to the same capacity as it would with Judy. So, of course, very quickly a terrible mistake occurs, which causes a tragedy, which then causes another tragedy that leaves Punch and Judy to fend for themselves. I've really been singing this movie's praises recently, and the only way I've been describing it to some of my friends is that there's a lot going on here, and there really is. So obviously you got the relationship between violence and entertainment. And the show, between the two of them, between Punch and Judy, it becomes clear quickly that the man beating the woman with a bat doesn't stem too far from their reality. And you see there's a few shockingly disturbing sequences of domestic violence in this movie. I do want to say it's not as bad as something you would see in The Sopranos, or, I mean, okay. I'm not referring to the husband and wife in The Sopranos, I'm referring to the therapist. It's nothing as graphic as that. But just a warning. Okay, that's just a warning. So, but not only between Judy and Punch is there's this sort of barbaric relationship, but you come to realize that the town feeds off of that energy, feeds off of the violence of the show, and it carries it over into their real lives. So there are constant executions in Seaside. The law has a very meager presence. There's one constable who's trying to establish order by himself, and he's sort of revered or sort of looked at as like a dork, pretty much. And this town takes that same energy that they have and that same ruckus crowd mentality that they have in Punch and Judy's puppet shows and apply it to like their weekly stonings and their hangings and their witch burnings and all of these things. And you learn, and the idea quickly develops in your head that the violence that we've become so accustomed to, you know, be it in our video games now, is not so different from the violence behind the great stories of like Salem witch trials and things like that. And you see stonings in the life of Brian, you know, satire between entertainment and violence is very common. You know, sometimes overly violent things are satires of themselves, you know, like those gruesome horror movies where it's kind of like a head is decapitated and blood takes up the entire camera, you know, and everything you see is just gore. You know, like those are sort of playing on this idea as well. And this movie really succeeds in that arena. It also succeeds with its feminine perspectives. Like I said, Judy is the antithesis to Punch here. She's sort of known as the sweet local girl, or the sweet local woman who plays with children. She's a great mother of her own. And she's sort of like a light, you know, like when this town is really dark, and she's sort of just a light. Yeah, and it extends beyond Judy. There's also a younger girl in a neighboring village, though they're more outcasts than neighbors. They're woodsmen, or they're woods people who believe in spirits and all that sort of stuff, and they're considered to be witches and all that nonsense, yada yada. But there's a young girl there who interacts with Judy and is like, does Punch always win? Because he's doing all of these terrible things. He keeps beating people up. Why does he keep winning? So, you know, there's really great conversation woven in there. I already mentioned the presence of law here and the mob mentality, and how mobs and audiences are very, the lines between them are very few and far between. The lines between them are very thin. There we go. Jeez, I don't know why I said thin and far between. It makes no sense. But here, if you couldn't tell, it's very thematically rich. If that's the only impression that you've gotten so far. The problem is, like I said, this is her directorial feature. It seems like she's trying to cram all of these ideas into her first movie. And it's impressive that, like, she's able to do it, you know. It's a little scrambled at points. It seems a little disbalanced, or that sometimes things are tipping over, and towards the end, it feels like the movie could go in any of 5 different directions, which you don't want your conclusion to do. But the effort is very admirable, to say the least. And there's also, you know, speaking to a visual standpoint, the movie is also very impressive. This takes place in the 16th or the 17th or 16th century here, and it really feels like a Grimm's fairy tale version of the 17th century. Like I said, there are witch people in the woods, and the world that they live in looks like looks straight out of Little Red Riding Hood and stuff. And it's very impressive because this is an Australian film. So the production designer, whose name is slipping me right now, I feel really bad about it, did the production design of Cargo, a Netflix movie that came out a couple years ago that was based on a short film.
Joe Ford.
That's the production designer?
Yep.
All right, great. Thank you. So in both of those cases, Joe Ford has shown himself to do some really impressive things with the Australian outback. So those are 2 completely different worlds in this one continent. It's very impressive. A continent that we sort of regard as like being all desert and everything that's there wants to kill you. You know, there's a lot of very good world building done here. There's a very chaotic score, a very violent string score at times, and the cinematography is also very impressive. So I think this movie is really a lot of fun. You know, like I said, it sort of falls victim or becomes prisoner to its many thematic ideas, but I think it works it works fine. I think this is a lot of fun, and it also makes you think. This is Judy and Punch. It's available on video on demand as of yesterday, or excuse me, Friday. It's podcast time. So
as of yesterday, whenever you listen to it now.
Yeah, it's available now. Geez, that's the easiest way to say it, right? So it's Judy and Punch, available everywhere, or available on video on demand now, including Amazon Prime. And I'm going to give it 4 out of 5 stars.